Hello dear 1000 PS friends, and a warm greeting and service today from the world-renowned university city of Oxford. And why exactly we're in Oxford today, and why we're here with the brand new Honda CUV-E, and why this scooter might just be the one that benefits the most from having a top case. I'll tell you all about that in just a moment. Yes, folks, as you can already see in front of me, today I get to ride a scooter. And we're not talking about some standard scooter, no, we're riding a fully electric one. You might have seen this machine here in front of me before, the CUV-E. That stands for Clean Urban Vehicle, and the E stands for electric. For instance, you might have spotted it at the EICMA, where it was unveiled last year, and now it's ready for series production. Today was our very first time riding it, and I'm about to give you a proper classic rundown of what kind of machine this is, what sets it apart, the technical specs and so on. And at the end, I'll also give you a bit of my personal take on how it rides and what kind of market potential it has. So let's jump right in. What do we have here in front of us? We're talking about a fully electric scooter that would roughly be the equivalent of a 110 to 125 cubic centimeter petrol model. It puts out a peak power of 6 kilowatts, which is just over 8 horsepower. Its so-called continuous power output is 4.2 kilowatts, a bit lower, so that's around 5 to 6 horsepower. We've got a maximum torque of 22 Newton meters, which is actually not too shabby. Total weight is 120 kilograms. That's 14 kilograms lighter than the SH125, the so-called benchmark, if you like, from the petrol world. Seat height is a very comfortable 760 millimeters, which means even shorter riders should be able to sit comfortably on it. However, I'd say the step-through width is on the broader side. There are definitely scooters that are a bit narrower there. And the key feature of this machine is that it's got 2 batteries, and I want to go straight into that now. So this is one of the batteries inside here. It's an in-house development by Honda. Each battery has a capacity of 1.31 kilowatt hours, and we've got 2 of them fitted underneath here. You might already know this battery, not exactly the same one is used in the EM1E. That's basically the 50cc equivalent of this scooter. And the difference now is that the EM1E has just 1 of these batteries, while the CUV-E has 2. That means you basically get double the power, or more precisely, double the capacity. So 2 times 1.31 kilowatt hours. And now let's address the elephant in the room, because this is what everyone's really curious about. What does that mean in terms of range, in terms of top speed, and in terms of charging time? Let's go through it. So range, when it comes to electric scooters or electric vehicles in general, range is always one of the most frequently asked questions. And of course, when you look at how big these batteries are and what kind of capacity they offer, it's obvious that this is not a long distance runner. I'll keep the suspense going just a bit. So according to Honda, the maximum range in standard mode is 72 kilometers. Now, you have to say that's not exactly mind-blowing. However, this scooter is built for commuting. That means for getting to and from work. And the average commuting distance for someone in Central Europe, especially in our regions, is somewhere between 30 and 40 kilometers for a return trip. So from that perspective, this would actually be the perfect commuting tool. You can go there and back once, and then again there and back. That would pretty much use up 1 full charge. So in theory, you can ride it 4 times on a single full charge. Whether that's enough for your needs, you'll have to decide for yourself. I don't want to open up a big debate about it. I'll just tell you what the numbers say in theory. So we've got 2 of these batteries. And here comes another important point. I had someone explain this to me in a bit more detail. So this battery, once it's fully charged, as you'd expect, sits at 100%. But because we've got 2 batteries inside, the scooter always levels itself to the lower charge of the 2. What does that mean? Well, let's say one battery is at 100% and the other is at 50%. Then it doesn't average out to 75%. Instead, the scooter assumes both are at 50%. it draws power from one battery and then draws the same amount from the other. And once that point is reached, it stops. So to get the full range out of both batteries, you really need to make sure both are fully charged. That makes sense. And most importantly, they need to be charged evenly. Now then, how does the charging actually work with this machine? It's super simple. I think Honda's done a really clever job here. First of all, this, as I mentioned, is the battery. It weighs 10 kilos. It's actually quite easy to lift. You can grip it both vertically and horizontally. Really handy. I must admit, I need to get back to the gym because 10 kilos used to feel lighter than it does today. And this here is the charger, since there are 2 batteries inside. When you buy the scooter, you get 2 of these batteries and 2 chargers as well. Because you can't charge the CUV-E with the batteries still installed. You have to remove them and plug them into the external charger. That means if you connect both at once, you can charge them simultaneously. It plugs straight into a standard household socket. Now let's talk charging times. According to Honda, from 25 to 75%, the battery takes around 3 hours. From zeros, completely empties, to 100%, it takes 6 hours using this charger on a household socket. So let's take the worst case scenario. You ride it to work in the morning and use, say, around 50% of the available energy. Then you plug it in, and after about 2 to 3 hours, it's pretty much fully charged again. Then you ride home. If you've drained the battery completely, maybe because of a longer commute, then you'll need to allow around 6 hours for a full charge. All right. Now that we've covered all the battery tech, I'd like to quickly show you how to actually get to the batteries. There's a button here. It unlocks the seat. You press that, the seat pops open, and inside you've got the 2 batteries. There's a lever mechanism that's super easy to use, and just like that, the battery's out. And putting it back in is just as simple. Slide it in, close the lever, done. Now the downside of this design, as brilliantly simple as it is to use, is obvious. No storage space. And that's really a bit of an issue. That's why I said earlier that this is one scooter where you really need a top case. Because as it is, there's essentially 0 under-seat storage. The 2 batteries take up all the space where a helmet would normally go. You can't even fit in a helmet. The only storage the scooter offers is this small glove compartment here. It fits a 0.7 liter bottle, so a water bottle basically. There's a USB-C charging port as well, but that's it. Luckily, as you can see here under my Schubert J2 helmet, we've got a rear rack for mounting top cases. There are actually 3 different ones available, 2 smart cases and 1 standard top case. Each comes in either 35 or 45 liter capacity. And honestly, I would highly recommend getting one, because then you can carry a helmet, your shopping, or anything else you'd normally expect to bring along with a scooter. Right, let's move on. We've covered the battery, we've briefly discussed the motor, we've touched on practicality, but now I want to show you a little highlight of mine on this scooter, and that's the single-sided swing arm. You can see it right here, the rear wheel is completely exposed. You normally see this kind of setup on the Ducati or certain Triumph models. That's where you'd recognize it from, but not typically on a scooter. I think the construction of this swing arm is genuinely quite cool. It's cast from a single piece, and the motor is integrated directly into the swing arm, transferring the power straight to the wheel. And I really think it looks great from a design perspective. I also find it quite clever from an engineering standpoint, and you can tell the aim here was efficiency and low weight. And to be honest, it rides fairly decently too. Speaking of handling, and this is where things get a bit more critical, which you might not be used to hearing from me. What we've got here is a fairly standard chassis layout. Up front, we've got a 26mm fork. At the rear, there's a monoshock sitting above the single-sided swing arm. Of course, there's no adjustable suspension, that goes without saying, but still, and I've got to say, for me personally, the suspension is probably the biggest downside on this machine. Up front, we've got 90mm of travel. At the rear, it's 75mm. And I have to assume this scooter isn't just meant for Europe, but also for other parts of the world. It's designed with that in mind. Now, the roads here in Central Europe are arguably some of the best you'll find anywhere. Even here in Oxford, the road quality isn't quite up to the standard we're used to in our region. And to be completely honest, I describe the suspension as rather unrefined. It feels a bit bony. Bigger hits come through really harsh. Small undulations are handled fairly well, but I think that's mainly thanks to the tires. At first, the suspension doesn't feel bad at all. Those really fine ripples in the road get ironed out nicely, but as soon as you hit a proper bump, something like a pothole or a sharp edge in the tarmac, you just don't get any real damping. And I have to say that's genuinely a shame. I think that could have been done better. They could have added a bit more damping, which would have made it feel a lot more composed and comfortable. I had a long conversation with Honda's suspension engineer about this exact topic. And here's something quite amusing. He explained to me that the suspension was intentionally tuned to simulate pitch, that front-to-back motion, which you don't naturally get with an electric drive, since there's no classic engine braking like you'd have with a combustion engine. I'll touch on that in a second. So in order to give you that familiar feel, especially when you roll off the throttle, they've engineered the front fork in such a way that it moves slightly to create that impression. Personally, I wasn't really convinced by that. The explanation made sense to a degree, but for me, it still doesn't feel quite right. I think they could have just gone for a higher quality setup. That said, you have to remember this model is clearly designed with beginners and newcomers in mind, riders who aren't super experienced on two wheels, and of course, cost plays a role here too. The idea was to bring in some modern technology while still keeping the price at a competitive level. Speaking of price, and here comes a bit of a letdown. I can't actually give you the final price right now, because at the time this video is being recorded, it hasn't been announced yet. The only reference point I can give you is this. In Spain, the scooter, as it's shown here, costs around 4,600 euros. So if you fire up Google or ask ChatGPT, you might be able to estimate roughly where that price will land in your country. And while we're still on the subject of the chassis, where, as I said, I think the suspension is okay, but nothing more, I'd also like to touch briefly on the brakes. At the front, we've got the standard 190mm brake disc paired with a Nissin single piston caliper. At the rear, there's a 130mm drum brake. There's no ABS. Instead, we've got CBS, which stands for Combined Braking System. So what does that mean? Well, if I pull the front brake, which is the right-hand lever, it behaves like a regular brake. Nothing special. But if I pull the rear brake, which is the left-hand lever, the one that would normally be the clutch on a motorcycle, then the system also applies the front brake automatically. That means when you use the rear brake, you actually get better braking performance than when you only use the front. Also, the weight distribution on this scooter tends to be a bit more rear biased. It's not as front heavy as some other motorcycles. So the rear brake, simply because of the weight layout, does more of the work than what you'd normally get on a regular bike. Honestly, when you're out riding, you can almost rely on the rear brake alone. You could skip the front entirely, but the rear just brakes better and the bike stays more stable. Speaking of braking, and I mentioned it earlier, let's talk about engine braking. Now, with the development of the CUV-E, Honda told us they deliberately wanted to avoid that sharp on-off feel you get from many electric vehicles. They've tried to soften or even eliminate it. And in practice, the throttle response, the way the bike reacts when you open or close the throttle, is extremely smooth, no matter which mode you're in. There are 3 ride modes available: Eco, Standard and Sport. I'll get into those in a second. But in all of them, you don't really get any noticeable engine braking. I asked them directly about this, and the answer was, no, it doesn't really recover energy when you roll off the throttle. So you'll find yourself using the brakes more than you would on, say, an electric car with strong regen. That's why I recommend using the rear brake mostly. It gives more braking force. And because when you close the throttle, the scooter just keeps coasting like a normal petrol one would. There's a tiny bit of energy recovery when you roll off, but honestly, it's so minor you won't notice it. And they couldn't tell me exactly how much gets recovered either. So in practice, it's basically negligible. Now back to those riding modes. Like I said, there are 3 of them: Eco, Standard and Sport. Let's start with Standard, and that's probably the one most people will use. As the name suggests, it's the default mode when you switch the scooter on. It's absolutely fine. Works perfectly. Smooth throttle response, linear power delivery, it all feels very natural. Eco mode, on the other hand, is really just about saving energy. Honestly, in our parts of the world, with normal traffic flow, it's pretty much unusable. The throttle feels extremely sluggish. Sure, you might squeeze out an extra 3 or 4 kilometers of range when you're really running low. In that case, fair enough, but for normal city traffic, I wouldn't recommend it at all. Standard mode, like I said, is totally fine. Smooth, easy to control, does everything you need. Then there's sport mode, and honestly, it would be great if that were the default, because that's where you really feel the punch. You twist the throttle and get that torque hit you expect from an electric scooter. In sport, it's properly fun to ride. It's the first time the scooter really feels like a lively 125 or more. In standard mode, it feels just right for what you'd call a 110cc equivalent. In eco, it's more like riding a 50cc moped. That's just how it is. One more interesting point about the modes, you can switch between them easily with a simple switch. However, sport mode, the one that gives you the full 6 kilowatts of power, is only available when your battery has more than 30% charge remaining. If you drop below 30%, you can no longer activate sport mode. That's because the electronics are trying to preserve range rather than drain the battery too quickly. The entire system is controlled, and I really like this, through a 7-inch TFT display. And it's genuinely massive. I imagine the conversation among Honda's engineers when something like this, how big of a screen can we fit on it? And someone just said, yes, that's how it feels. Because what we've got now is a 7-inch TFT display, and it looks even bigger thanks to the chunky bezel around it. Honestly, it feels like they've just slammed a full-on tablet right between the handlebars. But the operation is brilliant. You control it using a directional pad on the left-hand side, and it's all super intuitive. I always say, I don't like spending ages learning how these things work. I just want to hop on, ride off, and figure it out on the fly. And here, that works flawlessly. So full marks, 2 thumbs up for the Honda engineers. They nailed it. We've also got fully integrated navigation via the Honda app with full connectivity. So if that's your thing, there's plenty to explore. And it's very cleverly done. If you use the Honda app for navigation and enter a destination, the display won't just show the usual info, like how far it is and how long it'll take. No, it also shows you your estimated remaining range at your destination, and if it calculates that you won't make it, the system will actually warn you in good time so you can plan a charging stop. I think that's a really smart touch. Bluetooth pairing with a helmet intercom, no problem at all. Works perfectly. A few of us tested it and had no issues. So yeah, it's packed with features, and there's also a fun little bonus. Next to the power switch, there's a big R. That's for the reverse mode. Now, at just 120 kilograms, the scooter is pretty light. But if you want a bit of help, this lets you roll backwards with assistance. It's easy. You press that button. The display prompts you to press the second button, the down arrow, and off you go. You'll roll backwards at up to 3 kilometers per hour, fully automatic, no throttle needed. Just press the 2 buttons and there you are, reversing. Nicely done, right? What else can we talk about? Let's touch on the finish. Since I don't know the final price, or only the Spanish ballpark figure, the question for me always comes down to 2 things. What does it cost and is it worth it? And while I can't say yet whether it's worth the money, I can tell you the finish on the CUV-E is genuinely good. Paint quality, panel gaps, material feel, build quality, all of it is absolutely top notch. This is classic Honda quality, exactly what you'd expect when they bring out a scooter. And in that respect, it definitely delivers. But for me, the real sticking point with this machine is the lack of storage. The seat is okay. Visually, I think it could be a bit more appealing. Comfort-wise, it's decent. But if the seat were slightly higher, a bit softer, maybe more supportive, it could actually help mask some of the suspension's roughness, especially from the rear, where harsh impacts really do come through. So that might have been an opportunity. Also, we've only got 12-inch wheels here. And I'm sure some of you are now thinking, hang on, doesn't Honda use bigger wheels on the SH125 for stability? I asked that exact question, why 12 inches here? And I think the answer was refreshingly honest. It's a mix of price and design. Of course, the scooter is super nimble thanks to that. Weighing in at 120 kilos, it's just incredibly easy to move around. And those 12 inches are honestly a dream for handling in city traffic. The turning radius is 1.99 meters, so just under 2 meters. And it really does feel like you can spin it around on the spot. That's genuinely practical. The tall tire profile helps too. As I mentioned earlier when talking about the suspension, the tires soak up a bit of the roughness. That works well visually. Yeah. I think proportionally it all works. The small wheels still look balanced on the scooter, but I have to admit, from a riding dynamics perspective, I would have preferred larger wheels. That's just the truth. No way around it. Now, I don't want to get too deep into every little detail about the design. A lot of that is always marketing fluff anyway. You get a little bit of wind protection as it covers the shoulders slightly, but your head, of course, takes the full wind blast. And now I want to wrap up with my personal conclusion and touch once more on the whole battery topic, because I think it's important. What I really like about this system, or rather this whole concept, is the idea of two removable batteries. It's the exact same battery used in the EM1E. And that shows that Honda understands the benefit of a more universal battery, one that could be used across multiple future vehicles. Makes total sense. They even showed us a concept they're currently trialing, a sort of battery station. I believe they're testing this in India. Imagine a big cabinet, something like a vending machine, holding maybe 12 or 15 of these batteries. You pull up, take your empty batteries out, slot them in, grab 2 full ones, plug them into your scooter and ride off. If that kind of system existed at every petrol station, or even just widely enough, it would completely solve the range issue, in my opinion, because that's exactly what we all want: a quick, hassle-free way to swap empty batteries for full ones. How it would work in terms of pricing, billing or subscription models, well, that's a whole other story. But the idea itself is pretty compelling. You might know similar systems already. Those portable power bank swap boxes for phones and other devices, same idea here. Naturally, I asked, why don't we already have this? And the answer is fairly straightforward. It has to be financially viable. Right now, especially in our region, there just aren't enough of these scooters on the road. So you can't just deliver hundreds or thousands of spare batteries to filling stations and have them sitting there unused, only being swapped out once or twice a month. That's just not going to be profitable. And that's the challenge. We're basically dealing with a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. And that brings me to my conclusion on this machine. I think the path Honda has chosen is absolutely the right one. A clever, simple battery system that's easy to charge, easy to carry. It works. It all makes sense. Now, for me, the scooter itself really depends on where the final price lands. If it ends up being priced in the premium segment, then I think it'll be a tough sell, because at that price, I'd expect ABS. I'd want a better suspension. I'd want built-in storage, maybe even a better seat. Yes, the 7-inch TFT display is lovely, but at a premium price, I'd want more across the board. However, if the pricing turns out to be very competitive, and let's not forget there's not much direct competition in this segment just yet, then I think it has real potential. If enough people start buying something like this, and enough of these batteries get into circulation, and maybe even members of the community start pushing for battery swap stations in larger urban areas, even just 2 or 3 of them, then I believe this could really take off on its own. And then we wouldn't have this chicken and egg dilemma anymore, where you keep asking yourself, should I buy one? Can I buy one? How do I handle charging? That would all be solved. For that to happen, I think Honda would need to take the first step as make the initial investment, so to speak. If they truly believe in this concept, then I can imagine people saying, all right, if I've got charging stations nearby where I can just swap batteries easily, then this is the way to go. As far as actual riding is concerned, this isn't going to satisfy the hardcore motorcyclist simply because of the real world range. And I don't want to keep that from you. Here's what we recorded while riding in Oxford today. You can now see how many kilometers I covered and how much range I had left at the end. So no, you probably won't get the full 72 kilometers in everyday use. I think a realistic estimate is somewhere between 50 and 60 kilometers of actual riding range. And that brings us full circle. Why are we in Oxford? One of the reasons I believe this concept could have strong market potential is exactly this. Oxford has a zero-emission zone. That means in certain areas, you're only allowed to ride electric vehicles, or none at all. And if you've been following the news, you'll know that cities like Paris, Amsterdam, and other major urban centers are seriously considering similar policies. And look, Even if you live in a big city like Paris, you still want to be mobile. And that's exactly where I think this concept could shine. Imagine living in Paris, taking the batteries out, carrying them up to your flat, charging them overnight, and in the morning you just slot them back in and off you go. No worries about where to park, no extra costs, no charging infrastructure headaches. In that kind of environment, I think this scooter makes total sense. Now, whether this exact version is the final form, that I'm not so sure about. As I've said, I'd improve the suspension, I'd want more built-in storage, or at the very least the top case should be included in the price, because right now it costs extra. But the concept itself, I find it genuinely exciting, and I think this approach with removable swappable batteries is absolutely the right one. I hope other manufacturers might eventually rally behind this too. There was once a committee that tried to push for standardized batteries across two-wheelers. Honda, as they told me, has since pulled out of that and is now pursuing its own development path. I think that's a shame. Because honestly, if this system existed in a Yamaha or a Kawasaki or a BMW or a KTM, and I think that was really cool, because this battery system, I have to say, it has convinced me. And with that in mind, I hope I've now told you a lot of important and informative things about the CUV-E. And with that, I hope I've been able to share lots and lots of useful and important info about the CUV-E with you. I think I've really said everything there is to say about the CUV-E. If you've got any questions about the scooter, feel free to drop them in the comments. Please leave us a like, subscribe to the channel for more videos, and check out the linked written review. There are a few more details in there, plus links to your local country pages. So, with that, thank you very much, cheers, and goodbye from Oxford.